2, 1. All right, welcome back to our final live clinic of the 2020 season. My name is Coach Chris Haddad, and we have a great guest with us tonight, Coach Tommy Bowden. Coach, thank you so much for taking time and joining our live clinic.
Hey, thanks for having me. I've been away from football for a little bit, so this will get Rev back up.
Oh, for sure. And for those who don't know Coach Tommy Bowden, I have some accolades here, Coach. Hopefully you don't mind me reading these off. But coach for 32 years, head coach for 11 and a half of those years, 2 years at Tulane, 9.5 years at Clemson, 90 wins as a head coach, and has never had a losing season. Coach, and this is what the theme of tonight's going to be, is building a winning culture. And I want to kick it off with something I've heard you talk a lot about, your CARDS acronym, which stands for commitment, accountability, responsibility, discipline, and sacrifice, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Okay. Yeah, Chris, the reason those 5 things you just mentioned, the commitment, accountability, responsibility, discipline, sacrifice. The 19 years I bounced around as an assistant, most of the time in the SEC. I said, if I can ever become a head coach, I think the key nowadays is players to make good decisions. If you can get them to make good decisions socially, in the classroom, how they behave on the field, then you got a chance to be successful. At the paper nowadays, and you'll see just multiple players in trouble from coast to coast. I'm just talking about college football. So okay, what are the things that help young players make good decisions? And that's where the commitment, accountability, responsibility, discipline, sacrifice, the 5 foundations, I think, in helping young people make good decisions.
Yeah. And where did that stem from initially? Like, is that something that you, over the years, you just, okay, I needed this. I mean, you've been in the football game for a long time. Is that something you worked up over time? Did you get a little bit of something from each coach? Like, where did that stem from, the 5
a lot
acronyms?
is you probably might have done a little bit of research on my family. My father's a strong Christian guy, and that's the environment I was raised in. And being in a Christian environment, you look at the life of Jesus Christ, a commitment, accountability, responsibility, discipline, sacrifice. I've always been involved with an organization, and I learned this from my father, called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, FCA. So I said, well, gosh, the NCAA restricts the amount of time I can use as a head coach. I'm allowed to have 20 hours per week. Well, gosh, I'm held accountable for them 24/7. So I need as many resources as possible. So I looked as, in the South, they say football is religion, but religion's 24/7 down here. Christianity is a big part of the culture. So I drew some of it from my faith-based foundation. I'm a big military. I was not in the military, but I always kind of liked the military. And those 5 things surely apply to military. They apply to the Christian faith and football. So it's a perfect marriage of those 5 things. Kind of pulled them from several things, but from my faith-based background is, and just, you look at the sport of football and military, those 5 things are what it's about.
Yeah. Now, Coach, you've been quoted saying that you can't be a head coach unless you know how to motivate players. And what was your biggest form of motivation? Because I truly believe that you can't necessarily coach every kid the same way if you want to get the most out of them, right? There's some kids you got to get after a little bit more. There's some kids, right? How do you motivate your players? And what's the biggest thing that comes from a head coach in your eyes of being able to motivate a player properly?
Well, there's no doubt that's a key, because complacency is a key issue. I know one of the things, I think my father's got an NCAA record of 14 top 5 finishes. I don't think anybody's close to that, but he said one of the hardest part's not getting there. The hardest part's staying there. It's keeping them motivated, not letting them get content. So I kind of learned that at an early age, and you got to be sharp, because motivating players to like practice is hard to do. Practice is where that's where you win the game, and practice is not fun. You've got to find ways to motivate and coaching techniques that keep it interesting. But I was very fortunate, Chris, in the fact that my father was a good motivator, and I played for him. I coached for him for about 4 years early. But motivation is, you got to, football is a game of emotion, enthusiasm, energy, effort, and you got to motivate them along those lines. If you don't coach it that way, there's a slim chance you don't get them to play that way. The motivation is, and believe it or not, and some of this, again, comes from my father, some of his faith-based background, but there's a faith aspect in motivation, and the fact that, hey, you're not going to play.
For sure. And
they all want to play. So
yeah,
there's a fear factor in motivation. Some coaches might disagree with, but I don't think Coach Saban would disagree with that. I know Dabo at Clemson, who played for me and coached for me, would probably agree with that also. So there's also a fear factor in motivation.
yeah, and Dabo was an assistant on your staff too. So how do you get your staff to buy in? You know, because from the head coach, you got to be able to motivate, but how do you get your staff to buy in to motivate as well, right? Because they're an extension and an arm of you when you're not in the room, right? Whether it be
yeah, and there's also the fear factor of them getting fired if they don't, you know. So, but one thing you do, as far as I was 19 years an assistant, 19 years as assistant, I built up a list of about 25 or 30 guys on the offense, 25 or 30 coaches on defense that I felt would be good coaches, but they were all good motivators. That's a big part of recruiting, is the ability to talk, the ability to communicate. I think I saw the top recruiters in college football last year, I think, were 30 and under. Now, age doesn't necessarily mean you're a great motivator. There's some great motivators, in their 50s and 60s. And my father coached till he was 80, and he was a great motivator. So, but again, you have to demand it from your coach, and they're going to look to you. So it's something that you demand, but usually guys that you hire in college, you know about their background, you call and get references, but usually you can turn on the tape and watch their position play and see if their players are playing with a lot of motivation, enthusiasm, and energy. And that's a good indicator that he's a good motivator.
Yeah, and you've hired a lot of young coaches, and I think that's probably where a lot of young coaches get caught up, is they try to be too friendly with the players, right? And you get caught and lost in kind of in that trap of being their friend as opposed to their coach. I understand your point of the top recruiters being under 30, but those guys probably have that off switch too, where they can be friendly and then they can turn into, okay, now I need to be a football coach. I'm not your friend anymore.
Yeah, there's a fine line you walk, because players know when you're sincere and you might be using them to get another job, or, hey, they know that. I think that's one of the things that Dabo does real well, as far as a sincere, legitimate interest in their well-being, academically, even spiritually. He's a strong Christian guy that pushes that aspect in his program. So I think a player can tell whether you're really interested in their growth in other areas other than football. But yeah, there's different buttons. When I coached early, I remember my father flew down to watch one of my practices at Tulane, flew over from Florida State, and took him back to the airport. He flew in a private plane. Before he got on the plane, he said, "Hey, you better be careful," because I'd grab guys, and I was a little more physical. And I was allowed. Coaching wide receivers, was a lot of my career. Wide receivers run about 30 or 40 yards down the field, and one's on the other side of the field. You got to yell. It's not like golf. Everything's not quiet when you get ready. It's a loud sport. So, and then I'm not a cursor. I don't curse. My father, one of the best ever, and he didn't. So that was never a problem for me. If I ever said one slip, the players knew I was serious. So there are ways that motivate, and each player's got a different on and off switch.
Sure. Yeah.
But it's important, Chris, but it is important. 85 scholarship players. It's important that I bend their will toward mine. I can't have 85 different coaching styles and philosophies. So as important as I understand what buttons to push, I have to bend their will toward mine and not vice versa.
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned Tulane, coach, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because in 96, Tulane went 2-9. You take over in 97. For any high school coach that's watching right now, what was your philosophy going into that season, taking over that program? What are the first things that you're going to do to change the culture of the program? Because 2-9 is essentially a losing culture, right? What'd you do first day you walked in the door to flip that culture around?
Chris, I think the big thing you have to do when you stand in front of that team for the first time, and most places they fired because they're not winning. So usually they're programs that are not winning. When I went to Clemson, they were coming off a 3-win season. I think both programs were coming off losing pro. I think you have to exude tremendous confidence. I don't know what you do. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep. Okay. Got you. Yep.
There you come. But I think they can tell if you're a little indecisive. There's some doubt and indecision in what you're saying. And let me just briefly say this. One of the reasons I think my brother Terry, his first year at Auburn, went undefeated. I went undefeated my second year at Tulane. I won 7 my first year, which they hadn't done in 7 years. I think one of the reasons that we did that is because my father, we studied him. And I went into Tulane knowing how I wanted to do winter conditioning, how I wanted to do spring ball, how much hitting I wanted, how to deal with the media, how to do discipline, drug testing, things of that nature. When I made a decision, there was no doubt or indecision. I think the players sensed that, and I was fortunate. People don't have that, but I was fortunate to have that kind of a go-to for information, and it really helped me. But I think standing up for the first time, it's a critical meeting, and your players need to look, and you need to sound confident and assured that you know what you're doing.
Yeah. And coach, is there anything physically that you changed? Like, is the weight room rearranged? Is the locker room rearranged? Like, is there anything that you went in there and you made completely different? I know a lot of teams that will, and I've been a part of this too. When we took over our program, we got new jerseys, right? So the new feel, we rearranged the weight room. We did a lot of things. So the building itself felt different. I'm at a high school level. Obviously, at University of Tulane, you can do a little bit more with a little bit more money. For us, it's a little bit different. But is there anything that you did physically to change the way that team operated?
Well, I know when I coached at Alabama, one thing you don't change uniforms there. You have to know the background, the history of the school. Almost a place where you don't change uniforms. But Tulane was a place that hadn't been winning. I think the biggest thing, because the very first thing you do is when you go into a program as a head coach, you go recruit. So you're going to take a program. The most important thing is the progress of those 85 players that you have. What do? You leave them. So your strength coach is critical because he's the one that's got them. And you hire a guy that wants to set the tempo. And then I think the first time they notice changes in winter conditioning, 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, you go out there and you really test their mental toughness, physical some, but really it's more mental than anything. And I changed the Tulane. I changed I know I changed the practice, and I know I changed the offense and the defense. I'm sure our temperament was a little more aggressive. I was really different. They had a really good head coach before me. He wasn't successful, but he was a nice guy. And I was a tad, really, I'd probably be fired now if I coached the way I did back then. I was a little hands-on, maybe too hands-on. But I didn't. I just do what I knew. I knew what I was going to do. At 19 years as an assistant, and then all that time studying my father, I knew if I could get them to do what I wanted to do, we could be successful. But coaching, you got to hire a good staff. I hired a guy named Rich Rodriguez on offense, and we did some things that were ahead of the curve offensively. And defensively, we just tried to hold on.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that, about hiring Coach Rodriguez, because he went on to do big things with his offense, right? Essentially your guys' offense, I should say, right? Later on. Talk about hiring him, because he came from high school, correct? Or was he in the college system before?
Just about.
It was a
place called Glenville
That's right.
State, West Virginia,
That's right.
3.
Yep.
It was like 5 buildings. But I had been around the shotgun with a guy named Homer Smith at Alabama. I knew I wanted to run the shotgun. And Tulane's a place where we played in the Superdome. I had no wind, I had no mud, I had no rain. I knew I'd have a good playing surface 100% of the time. At least I played at home. So I knew I wanted to run a fast-paced, no-huddle offense. Rich, I delved in it. I had experimented with it 2 years before I took the Tulane job. Rich Rodriguez was a young coach up in Glenville State, up in West Virginia, that had married the offense. That was it. If he ever ran the football. I had a little bit of I formation with my father in my background. And Rich had a track record as a play caller and offense. He was setting records. I wanted to hire somebody that wanted to do what I wanted to do, which was throw the football, spread the field, wide outs, fast-paced, no huddle, try to wear the other team down. And we were probably one of the first teams to marry that in college football. By marry, I mean it was your whole offense. But I went and found guys that would do what I wanted to do, and Rich was one of those guys that had a background.
Yeah, and if there's any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat for Coach Bowden. Coach, how big of
a sailor now, Chris? I didn't.
Yeah.
But football is an aggressive sport. We tried to tone that down a little when I got him into church.
Yeah. Now, how was that for you changing offenses? Because I know a lot of coaches will stick to what they know, and it just is what it is. What was it like for you making that switch, especially at a big time university like that, where you got to kind of, like you said, you can't go half into the shotgun offense. You got to go all into it and make it your baby, essentially.
Well, I knew I couldn't survive in the I formation. I was brought up on the I formation: sprint, draw, pass, toss, sweep, belly off of that, and those type of things. That's what I was brought up on. But I knew I couldn't survive at Tulane because that's a good offense if you've got equal talent. So I didn't have equal talent. It's a private school, and so I knew I had to do something unique. and not a lot of people that were shotgun throwing the ball at least fast paced.
Sure.
I mean, real fast. So I figured if I could do that. I happened to, Chris, inherit a really good quarterback, a guy named Sean King, and some good little skill guys and enough defensive guys to slow them down where we could get the ball back. But my father was not. In fact, the next year, after my first year at Tulane, a guy named Mark Vick was my father's head coordinator at Florida State. He flew him, and he made him. And Mark, he was an I formation guy. He wasn't real happy about coming over. But my father made that whole staff come over for 2 days and sat down and watch film. So I was doing something, and we had success, and it was kind of on the cutting edge. So he put his staff over. Then, as you can remember, his background with Charlie Ward, and won the Heisman, working into that type of offense.
Yeah. And so the next year you go, I believe it was 11-0. You have a perfect season. Why was that season perfect? And I want to talk more from a cultural standpoint of what made that team have the run that it had. I believe you guys finished 7th in the AP overall. Talk about that team a little bit, and culturally, just as the topic that we're talking about now, what was different about that team?
Chris, first of all, I inherited some really solid guys. I remember when I went in to interview for the job, they brought a different committee. I met with the AD, then I met with the academic people, then I met with the board. Then they brought in a 5-man player committee to talk with me. And one of the players looked at me. He said, "Coach, we want to win. We don't know how." I thought I knew how. And that kind of told me something. And we went out there and just beat the fire out of them that spring, in that winter conditioning. But we were doing something unique to college football. I had a quarterback and wide out. So we had players that wanted to win. They really did. They had enough. And they had confidence in me. I had a good staff, a really good staff. And consequently, like I said, we won that first year and broke all kind of records. And then I remember calling Lee Corso, and he was a Florida State graduate. And I said, "Listen," he was on the ESPN, that big show. I said, "Listen, let me get a private plane and fly you to Tulane. I think we got a chance to be really good." And he said, "Well, I'm afraid if I did that, I'd be biased, but tell me a little bit about your program." Well, I told him, I said, "If we get by Southern Miss and such, I think we could go undefeated." Well, he picked us to go undefeated pregame show, and they thought he was a genius. But again, it was kind of the perfect storm as far as having a quarterback that could throw, some good skill guys, having an offense that was ahead of the curve, enough good defensive players to slow them down, and we went undefeated.
Yeah, that's the perfect recipe to go. And while you guys are going undefeated, just moving forward a little bit now, that 98 season, Clemson goes 3-8. And again, you're taking over essentially a rebuild from a 3-8 season. What was different between going to Clemson that year as opposed to coming into Tulane for the previous years we did take over that program?
The difference is they had a little bit more tradition and history. They won a national championship in '81. Tulane didn't have any of that really history. Where Clemson had at least a little bit of recent history, but they had not had success lately. The difficult thing about Clemson was that when I went there, they were an I formation, a fullback, tight end football team. Quarterback, play action, pass, and throw a little bit, but not very much. So I sat there and went out there for spring ball. All I had was tight end and fullbacks, and they weren't going to get on the field, but they were great look. I mean, Tommy West really left some good players. He head coach before me, and a lot of them went through that. I tried to told them that the tight end and the fact they're going to get a lot of catches in pregame. Once the game started, they weren't going to catch all the balls you can in pregame warm up because you ain't going to get another one. And there's some really good players transferred. I hated to lose them when they hated to leave, but anyway, that was the most difficult thing is he recruited strictly for an I formation tight end offense, and I came in there trying to run the. But we won 6 the first year. Went to a bowl game, went to the Peach Bowl. I think Texas A&M maybe or somebody, but we had some success early simply because of the style of the offense, and the ACC hadn't caught up with it either. Yeah.
So just talking about cutting player, which again, you hate to do that. I shouldn't say cut players, but players transferred out because they weren't a fit for what you were trying to do.
They left. I didn't kick them off. They left. I didn't have to make them leave.
Yeah, they knew. So, was there anything different about that Clemson team or the Clemson structure, so say, when you had come in? You said that Tulane, the kids, they knew how to win. They didn't know how to win, but they had the will to win. What was different about this team this first year you took over?
the little bit difference was the fact that Tulane, Bowden coming in, I was the offensive coordinator at Auburn. They saw that Tulane saw that as a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the guys at Clemson have been recruited by Alabama and Georgia. And me coming up there wasn't a big deal. You had to get their attention a little bit different. I remember my first 10 meeting, it was a little bit different. I said, listen, some of you guys, I didn't recruit you. I know that. I don't know your parents, but some of y'all probably not going to be here after we go through this. I hate that. I don't want anybody to leave. I'm not going to run anybody off, but I'm going to challenge you. And we lost some guys, and, they just you don't recruit those guys. They see themselves as, maybe a little bit, they've been recruited by all the big programs. So you win at Tulane wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah,
for sure. Coach, we had a question that came in. 2001, I believe you played in the Gator Bowl against Mike Vick. The question is just talk about game planning for a guy like Mike Vick specifically. I know he's a once in a generation talent, but what was it like game planning for him?
Well, the biggest thing, you try to find the thing you don't want to do is cover everybody where he has to run it, because I didn't have anybody to tackle him, and I just remember that game specifically. And even when Virginia Tech played Florida State for the national championship, Florida State didn't have anybody that could tackle him either. But the biggest thing was defense, talking to the defense about it must be game tackling. It must, once you do your job, get the football, because you're going to have to hem this guy up with more than one person. One person's not going to be able to get him. So I remember the biggest thing was really keeping focus and eyes, obviously on your assignment, whether position you played, but to be in a position to rally. I think we called it rally was the terminology, to rally around once he breaks containment, because he's hard to hem up.
Yeah, he was dangerous. I believe he got hurt in that game later on. But yeah, it's I thought that was an interesting question coming through, because I remember that game specifically. Coach, just transitioning more towards just being a head coach. What's your involvement with the OC and the DC, and how much do you believe the head coach needs to be involved with both sides of the football? Or are you more of a hands-off, I'm going to manage the game and let my offense and defense coordinators do their job?
I'm more of a delegator than a micromanager, but again, I've always been involved with offense. I think an offensive coordinator for about 11 years. I've always been involved with play calling. So when I went to Tulane, I went to Clemson, I'd always sit in offensive meetings. Defensive coordinators, again, I learned this management style more so from my father. He's always been an offensive play calling, offensive guy. Go hire the best defensive coordinator you can, let him go, but hold him accountable. It's hard to fire a guy, Chris, if you're going to sit there and go in his meeting and tell him what to do. Because you try to fire him and say, well, you told me to do this. You set my meeting. You said I had to do this. So I tried to get his hands off as possible, especially on defense. Offense is hard to fire the offensive coordinator, because I was involved a lot of the times on offense. The longer I coach, the more I, like with Rich, obviously there's a guy that, turned out to be a great offensive coach, and I didn't mess with him very much. So, but again, I'm more of a delegator. Defensively, especially, I did try to spin. I didn't want the defense to think I didn't care about them. So I would take the first 25 or 30 minutes of practice and then walk through defensive drills, the individual, where you're doing individual early in practice as opposed to team and half line skeleton. And I try to make my face known and go down there and walk those individual drills, so they know that I was kind of interested in what was going on. And but my defensive coordinator pretty much let him go.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions I had written down too, is it must be tough as a head coach being offensive oriented. Whenever you specify drills, in the back of your head, you want the offense to win, right? Because you favor that side of the football. So keeping that balance, I know you touched on a little bit more, but just talk a little bit more about how do you keep that balance. But if you're a head coach that's offensive minded or even defensive minded, just keeping that balance between. Now, you recommend that you spend a little bit of time with them just to make your face known, and that you're on that side of the football and you believe in those guys and that you're encouraging those guys.
I think a lot of things too, Chris, is some of the drills can be geared to favor the offense, defense. And I spent my first few years in college coaching the secondary. So I kind of had a defensive mentality and temperament. So when I got to skeleton, they don't do this now, but back when we had pass skeleton, it was knock them out defense. I wasn't into this touching them and all that stuff. I played wide receiver and spent some time with a broken collarbone and a collapsed lung from taking shots in games. So, and if you got good equipment, as long as you're hitting above the waist and skeleton, it's tough to get hurt. So I tried to gear those drills, so skeleton drills with the defense. Defense all about if you can't tackle, and it's hard to get good at tackling if you don't tackle live. Mm-hmm. And you can't tackle a scout team. Well, gosh, anybody can go tackle. You can go tackle scout team guys, and you need to tackle good on good. So I always try to give my defensive linebackers. You got 5 minutes with the first team running backs. Tackle good on good. Defensive backs, I'm gonna let you tackle wideouts. Good on good. So I try to take some of my drills and slant them toward defensive improvement. I've always been even the offense is fun and good, but defense wins championships. So I try to gear my situational practice and drills with a defensive temperament.
Yeah, and that's the next question I had too. Just about coaching tackling nowadays. If you were a head coach nowadays, and this might be, I might be putting you in a tough spot here, coach, but what are your thoughts? I know a lot of coaches use tackling rings, different bags, different ways to wrap up. The philosophy's definitely changed, right? Since
it's so much harder to teach fundamentals now because and we talked about tackling, even blocking. It's hard to do blocking unless you do it full speed and do it live against good people. Mm-hmm. Same thing with tackling. It's hard if you don't tackle. You can tackle all those dummies and the circles and the rings or whatever they're doing nowadays. But again, unless you tackle good bodies, because when you get on Saturday, those are guys you're playing are pretty good. Mm-hmm. They make guys miss. And so doing some of that during practice. So I always felt like you had to go good on good, ones versus ones, a little bit of practice, whether it be third down or some short goal line, certain times, at least some of your drill work. So, but nowadays, like you said, Chris, it's tempered down even more as far as how time you can spend in full pads, as far as shells or shorts now. And you've really had to restructure. And it seems like, Chris, everything kind of migrates a lot from the NFL. And the NFL was like this a few years ago where they kind of tampered down, knocked out two-a-days. I don't know if there's any more two-a-days in college football. So I think trying to teach, you got to have good teachers as coaches. You got to be great teachers because you have to do it a lot of times not using live bodies, and that's difficult.
It is. And unfortunately, the technique suffers if you don't tackle live. And I know a lot of colleges and high schools are just going strictly uppers or just shells and just kind of rolling the dice that they hit the tackling wheel the right way. And that technique will come with it. And I think a lot of college coaches believe that by the time you hit that level, you should be able to tackle anyways. But especially at the high school level, just teaching that proper fundamentals. I agree with you 100%. Like you need to be you need to hit live because Friday night or Saturday game speed is nothing like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practice speed.
But you want to get, I used to tell my coaches, I'd rather them get hurt in the game than practice. Mm-hmm. So really, really be kind. And the longer I coach, the less physical, we got because I didn't want to get hurt in practice. Let's let them get hurt in the game. So find good ways and productive ways to get it done. And without injuring the player.
Yeah, absolutely. And Coach, as we're starting to wrap up here, again, if there's any questions for Coach, feel free to ask them in the chat. Coach, it wouldn't be right of me if I didn't ask about the Bowden Bowl. So I want to talk about the first time you guys played. What was Thanksgiving dinner like? What was Christmas like? No, but just be more serious. On the field, how was it?
Well, on the field, the first time my father and I played, like ESPN televised it, father and son had never played each other in the history of at least Division 1A. Florida State, that my first year, won the national championship. So they were undefeated when we played them. Played them up at Clemson. Had, I think, 86,000 in the stadium, only seated 83. So it was a great environment. It's a Saturday night national televised game, and they were number one. We were ahead 14-3 at halftime. But I knew with my team, I said, listen, I've been in his locker room before. I know what he's saying. Y'all better strap it up. They were a lot better team than we were, And came down to I remember one play, Chris, it came down, we had the ball on the right hash. And when Florida State blocked, they laid out to block it. But I needed the ball on the left hash because they laid out from the right. I was going to run that play where you flip the holder flips it, but it had to be on the left hash. We had the ball on the right hash. It was about 3rd and 3, and I called timeout. And Rich Rodriguez, when I were arguing, I said, Rich, I want to run a toss sweep toward the left hash. He said, Coach, they'll kill us. We can't block him in. I said, I don't care. I just want it on the left hash. Fake field goal will win this game. Well, we talked, and he probably remembers it differently, but we went for it, didn't get it. They blocked the field goal, and they beating us 17-14. He won the national championship there, and that year went undefeated.
Now, talk about years to come, right? Because I believe you had the better record out of all the games you played, correct?
We played 9 times.
Yeah.
He won 4, and he won 5. I won 4.
Okay.
I won the last 4 out of 5.
That's right. That's right. Yep.
He won the first 4, and I like to tell people after I lost the first 4 games, my AD called me and said, "Hey, we hired you to beat Florida State. You can't beat Bobby Bowden. We'll find somebody that can." I said, well, that got my attention. I beat him 4 the next 5 years. They called him in and said, "Hey, we hired you to beat Clemson. You can't beat your son Tommy. We'll find somebody that can." So they fired us both. Both of us out of coaching.
Yeah, right. Oh, geez. Coach, that's all I had on the agenda today. I can't thank you enough for your time. I know we're getting close to ending here. I'm looking at the chat. I'm not seeing any more questions come through. Coach, any last words before we sign off?
Well, football is very challenging, especially now. It's a great profession, and you have to love this profession. You don't surely get paid for the time that's invested. It's a great profession. It's a tremendous position of influence, and I think a lot of these coaches probably know that, especially at the high school level. You're a little more influential than you are at the college level. So I would encourage you guys. I know you get frustrated sometimes. The pay doesn't equal the hours that you put in, but you're doing a great service for the youth in America. Absolutely.
Coach Tommy Bowden. You can follow him on Twitter at Tommy_Bowden. Coach Bowden, can't thank you enough for your time. And if there's any questions for Coach Bowden, feel free to DM me directly and I'll ship those over to Coach Bowden. Thanks again. That's the end of our clinic season. Yeah. And